Hello class, this is Professor Quigley and it is week 5 and I am excited because we're going to spend one more week talking about loops. However, rather than talking about while loops where we keep looping over and over and over as long as a condition is true, we're going to talk about for loops. For loops can look a little complicated, but I promise if you bear with me for a few minutes, I can explain to you how just a few lines of code can do things a million times in a row with very little effort. All right. Well, last week, you remember we looped over and over and over and over again as long as a condition was true. Well, this week, we're still going to check a condition, but we're going to write our program in loop a little bit different. So to begin, let me just go ahead and show you what I have on the screen so far. So right here on the screen, I have console.writeLine, and then in quotes, it's the string that I want to output to the screen, and I'm using C#. So I'm going to run this application here, and it's going to open up a console window. Did I click that? Yep. So what it's going to do is it's going to open up here on the screen, and it's all this program does. It's real simple. It just says I love to program, and then if you notice here, the application is done. So I click any key to close the application. But let's say I wanted to write that 5 times. I could copy this. Oops, let me make sure I get the whole thing here. If I copied this, I can say paste, 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 paste. So that would be 5 times, and let's run that. So what I expect to happen is the program opens up, and sure enough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times it said I love the program. But what if I wanted to do this, say, 50 times? Okay, so I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can copy this. So I can say that's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. Now, if I run this, so this is a lot of lines of code here. I actually have that output statement. So remember, if you were in Zybooks, you would write put to output, or you would write put, and then quotes, you would write this, and then you'd put 2 outputs. But I'm in C# here. So I'm going to run this. This program's going to run, and it does it real quick, but if I were to scroll back up, I can see 50 times on the screen it actually wrote the words, I love to program. However, what would happen if I wanted to do this 50 million times? If I had to do this, if I had to copy and paste 50 million, I'd be here all day just copying and pasting. But what I could do is I could do this. I could say for, and I'm going to say int I equals 0. And then I'm going to say my condition is going to be as long as I is less than, we'll just do our first example, 50. Then we'll do I plus plus. Okay, I'll explain to you what this means here in a second. But I'm going to put this in here, cut that, paste it here, get rid of these extra lines. All right. So if you remember in a while loop, you always had to start by setting a value. So at the top of your code, you had a variable that was going to be like a counter. So if you imagine I represents the iteration. So this is going to be like your counter, and you're given it a default value of 0. Now your condition here is going to be as long as I is less than 50. So we know this for loop is going to start because if we're starting I off as equal in 0, then as long as I is equal as long as I is less than 50, we want the code that is indented to execute. Now, I++, it's a real shorthand. It's like a shortcut way in programming to say, actually, I can do it like this. I equals I plus 1. So let me do that. But I++ essentially just does that. And so if you remember that in your while loop, I had a starting value of 0. My condition was as long as I is less than 50, and then every time it loops, I want to add 1 to the value of I. So let's go ahead and run this here. Now when I run it, boom. Sure enough, the same thing, it outputted 50 times I love to program it. And let me drop a breakpoint in here so you can see how this actually works. So when I click start, the code actually, see how it highlights just this part? Now when I hit F11 and go to the next part, it gave me the starting value of I. It's going to check the condition, and if I mouse over I can see I equals 0. So that's going to be true. I is going to be less than 50. And then it's going to go into the loop here. So it's going to execute this line of code. It's going to come out. It's going to come back over here and add that 1 to I. Then it's going to come back over here in the middle, and it's going to check, does that condition equal true? And so if I mouse over I can see I now equals 1. So when I hit F11, I'm going to keep stepping through each programming statement. So remember in week 1 we talked about a sequence. Every time I hit F11, I am going to the next line of code that's going to execute in sequence. So now it's going to do this again. Hit F11, goes back into it. It comes right back over here where it's going to add 1 to I. It checks the condition again. Now I equals 2, and it keeps going back into it. So let me remove this breakpoint, hit continue. And then what you can see is that program executed a bunch of time. Now, here's what's also a neat trick about for loops. This I, remember how I was mousing over and it kept changing the value because every time it said I, we started off at 0, but then it said we plus 1 to it with each iteration. So I can actually say I love to program, and I can do plus, and then I can actually just output I. So if I were to run this now, I can quickly see how many lines of code I have here. So that's going to be real useful a couple weeks from now when we learn what arrays are. But I love to program. So it started off at 0, and notice it went to 49. The reason why it didn't print 50 is because our condition here, it says I is less than 50. If we wanted to actually go to number 50, we're going to have to write is less than or equal to 50. So when I run this now, starts off at 0, and it goes all the way to 50. Now remember all that copy and paste code that I was doing earlier where I said, what if we want to do 50 million? Let's try that, see if my computer crashes here. So rather than copying and pasting this 50 million times, I am just going to write 50, let's see, 1, 2, 3, that'd be 50,000. 1, 2, 3, that'll be 50 million. Whew, let's see what happens. I run it. Boom. Look at that going. Over here in the background, you can see Visual Studio is kind enough to show how much memory my application is using. But can you imagine having to copy all of these lines of code? That is insane. So class, this is the power of for loops. And while this runs here, I'm going to tell you, a while loop is great. Now we're going to learn this in discussion threads. A while loop is great whenever you are trying to check a certain condition, when you're trying to ask yourself and say, is this true? If it's true, I want to do this, and I want to loop over and over and over again until it's no longer true. A for loop really shines when you're doing something like this, when you know exactly how many times you want to loop. So let's see if this gets to the end here. So I know that I want to go exactly 50 million times. And you know what? 50 million is a really big number. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video, get you on your way. You can see my program over here is still running. I'll actually let you know how long it actually took to finish. But thank you for taking the opportunity to watch this. I promise you that if you watch this video, you are well prepared to participate in the discussions. I notice many people don't watch them, so share what you learned in the discussion threads. I'll see you there. Take care.